My daughter-in-law Jessica stood with her arms crossed over her chest. Her eyes were sharp and full of defiance. She looked at me without a trace of respect. Her voice hissed through clenched teeth. "Pay us back, or from now on you are no longer our father." The kitchen in Seattle was icy cold that afternoon. The polished gray granite countertop reflected the yellow light overhead. On the counter lay a neatly flattened debt statement that had just been thrown down. The figure of $300,000 sat prominently on the page. It was not an enormous amount, but it was enough to make the weight of betrayal feel unbearable. I did not look at Jessica. I turned to Brandon instead. My son. The son Martha and I had spent our entire lives raising. Now, Brandon sat with his head lowered. His hands were tightly clasped together. He said nothing, the silence of a weak accomplice. I caught the reflection of my snow-white hair in the glass cabinet and bitterly realized a painful truth. In this house, I was no longer a respected father. I was nothing more than an ATM card with gray hair, a financial tool and nothing else. When the money stopped flowing, family affection dried up with it. My chest tightened, but I did not show a single sign of weakness. 15 years of battling in the business world had taught me how to hide my emotions. I looked Jessica straight in the eye. Her face was smug, confident of victory. They thought I would panic. They thought I feared the loneliness of old age. They were wrong. I stood up. The chair scraped harshly across the wooden floor. I walked to the kitchen shelf and picked up my car keys. The weight of the metal key ring cleared my mind. I looked at the two parasites one last time. My voice was steady, cold as frozen water. "If that's the price of staying in this family, then I'm done with all of you." I turned my back and walked straight out the door. No shouting, no arguing. The anger inside me had transformed into a cold determination. They had started this debt collection game. Now they should prepare themselves to face the outcome. Welcome back to Dad's real-life revenge. Grab a drink, some snacks, get comfortable, and remember the people in these stories had every opportunity to do the right thing, they simply chose not to. Leave a comment with the number 1 so we can continue the story, and hit subscribe. You're going to enjoy this one. The Audi's door slammed shut. The chaos from the house vanished instantly, swallowed by the silence of the cabin. I sat motionless in the darkness behind the wheel. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel tightly. My heart pounded furiously. Beat after beat echoed inside my ears. Jessica's insults still lingered in my mind. Brandon's cowardice felt like a slap across the face of a father. I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath. Cold air from the climate control system filled my lungs. Slowly, my heartbeat settled. The initial anger faded away. In its place came something far colder, a determination as cold as ice. The resolve of a man who no longer had anything left to lose. They wanted to use family ties to extort me. They had chosen the wrong target. I opened my eyes. Seattle's streetlights shone through the windshield. I looked down at my hands. The veins and wrinkles of old age stood out clearly. I thought of Martha. I thought of the cold granite countertop back in that kitchen. Right there, I had stroked Martha's hair during the final days of her life. She had held my hand and told me to live as happily as possible. That house represented the sweat and sacrifice of our entire lives together. It was not a place for those two parasites to trample over. I shifted into gear. The car sped into the night. I was not heading to the grocery store as I usually did. I was not calling old friends to complain. My first stop was the central bank. The dashboard clock showed 9 o'clock at night. The bank was closed, but I enjoyed the privileges of a VIP client. I had a key that could open the door to my own freedom. I parked at the curb. Pulling out my phone, I looked at the screen. There was no apology from Brandon, not a single message, only a frightening silence from their side. They thought I was out gathering money. They thought I was afraid. They were completely mistaken. The 72-hour countdown had officially begun, and I intended to use every second of it to reclaim what belonged to me. I stepped out of the car. Seattle's cold drizzle struck my face. I smiled. A deadly smile. I knew exactly what I needed to do next. My plan would begin at the very place where they believed they had the most control over me. Jessica and Brandon could never have imagined that the first blow I delivered would be that ruthless. 8 o'clock the next morning. I was sitting in the executive management office of the bank. Across from me sat Thomas, a longtime friend and my personal financial advisor. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. It was nothing like the suffocating atmosphere in my house the night before. I sat upright in a leather chair. My face showed no emotion. I slid a folder across the desk toward Thomas. I want all of Brandon's authorizations revoked. I want my son's status as a joint account holder terminated immediately. Thomas looked at me in surprise. He asked if I was certain. I did not offer much explanation. I simply gave a firm nod. Do exactly as I say. Thomas began typing. The steady clicking of the keyboard filled the room. I stared at his computer screen. Displayed there was the complete spending history of Brandon and Jessica. The rent for Brandon's luxury apartment downtown. The monthly payments on Jessica's new SUV. Every dollar was being automatically withdrawn from my account each month. They had been draining me day after day without a shred of shame. I personally entered a new password for the remote management system. It was no longer the sequence Jessica often tried to observe whenever I logged in at home. She thought she was clever. She thought she had this old man figured out. Thomas moved the cursor over the final confirmation button. He looked at me one last time as if offering a final warning. I leaned forward and placed my finger on the left mouse button. A single click. The crisp sound echoed through the office. The screen immediately turned green with a notification confirming successful execution. All recurring payments were terminated at once. Brandon's and Jessica's supplemental cards were completely deactivated. The financial faucet had officially been shut off. The flow of money sustaining their artificial luxury had been cut off by my own hand. I stood up and adjusted the collar of my suit. My chest felt lighter than it had in years. This revenge involved no gunfire, no shouting. It began with nothing more than a mouse click in complete silence. I walked out of the bank. Morning sunlight spilled across the streets of Seattle. I knew exactly what would happen next. The moment their phones received the first declined payment notification, their sandcastle would begin to crumble. But that was not all. This was only the first strike. I was already on my way home, and what I was about to do next in that house would be the thing that truly turned their lives into a living nightmare. The trunk of the Audi swung open. Inside were 3 brand-new Schlage smart lock sets. I personally lifted the heavy toolbox and carried it into the house. The house was silent. Brandon and Jessica were undoubtedly still sleeping late in their luxury rental apartment. They probably believed I was running all over Seattle trying to scrape together $300,000. I began removing the lock from the front door. The clatter of metal echoed through the quiet house. One by one, the old screws fell onto the hardwood floor. I wiped the sweat forming on my forehead. Oddly enough, this kind of physical labor brought me a sense of peace. Each turn of the screwdriver felt like loosening another knot that had been strangling my life. I installed the new lock. The mechanical deadbolt snapped into place with a sharp click. I repeated the process on the back door and the garage entrance. From this moment on, this house was my fortress. The old access codes were erased. Brandon's fingerprint had been rejected by the system. Suddenly, the phone in my pocket vibrated. I set down the pliers and pulled it out. A text message from Jessica. We expect confirmation of the transfer by Friday noon. Don't mess this up. Her arrogance was visible in every word. She was giving me orders the way a master ordered a servant. Not once did she stop to think about where that money came from. The only thing she cared about was satisfying her own greed. I stared at the screen. My face remained expressionless. I placed the phone on the granite countertop. No reply. My silence was the cruelest answer I could give them. I walked upstairs and moved down the empty hallway. I looked around the large house. It had once been a home. A place filled with laughter shared by Martha and me. But ever since Brandon married Jessica, they had turned it into a mining operation. They treated every sacrifice I had made as something they were entitled to. I stopped in front of the study on the west side of the house. The oak door was closed. I placed my hand on the doorknob. A vague surge of anger rose inside me. This room held more memories of Martha than any other place in the house. And now it had been tainted. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. What I saw immediately sent my blood boiling. In that instant, I knew the second day of my purge had to begin immediately. And what I was about to do in that room would expose my wretched daughter-in-law for exactly who she really was. The overpowering scent of cheap perfume hit me the moment I stepped inside. Martha's study on the west side of the house had been completely transformed. Jessica had turned it into her personal fashion office. Bright, flashy dresses hung from clothing racks. Makeup cases were scattered carelessly across the desk. I walked toward the corner of the room. Our wedding photograph had once hung proudly there. Now it was gone. In its place was an oversized portrait of Jessica herself. I opened the cabinet against the wall. Empty. The journals, keepsakes, and memories from my wife's younger years had been removed without a second thought. I eventually found them in the dark basement. They had been stuffed into black garbage bags and tossed beside a pile of firewood. My chest rose and fell heavily. A fire of anger erupted inside me. But I did not yell. I forced myself to remain calm, cold, focused. I went down to the storage room and dragged up 5 large cardboard boxes. Then I began cleaning. I ripped Jessica's portrait off the wall. I hurled it into the bottom of a box. The glass shattered with a sharp crash. The sound was strangely satisfying. Next came her business files. Then the expensive high heels purchased with my money. Everything was quietly packed away. I pulled a long strip of packing tape. The tearing sound sliced through the silence of the room. Each box I sealed felt like another piece of freedom returning to me. Every strip of tape was a declaration that the invader was being removed from my life. I was reclaiming Martha's sacred space. I was washing away the contamination they had brought into it. I carried the final box into the hallway. At that exact moment, my phone screen lit up on the granite countertop. It was not a text message. It was an automated email notification from the bank. Brandon's secondary account had just been declined during a transaction at a shopping center. The mouse click from that morning was already producing results. I picked up the phone. I stared at the brief notification. I did not write a lengthy explanation. I did not call my weak-willed son to lecture him. I typed only 2 words. Too late. No explanation. No argument. I sent the message. I knew Jessica would lose her mind when she saw it. She would have no idea what was happening. She still believed she held the upper hand. The truth was that the financial noose was tightening around both of their necks. Half of the second day was already gone. I locked the door to the West Side study. Then I picked up my car keys and headed outside. The next decisive strike would not happen inside this house. I was going somewhere Jessica loved to visit, a place where she proudly displayed her illusion of wealth, and I intended to tear that illusion apart in front of everyone. The upscale organic grocery store sat in one of Seattle's wealthiest neighborhoods. This was one of Jessica's favorite places. She loved the feeling of being greeted by employees the moment she walked in. She loved selecting the most expensive items on the shelves and casually swiping the supplemental card connected to my account. I pushed through the entrance. The scent of herbal essential oils mixed with the soft sound of jazz music filling the air. I walked straight to the checkout counter. The store manager recognized me immediately. He offered a professional smile and greeted me politely. I did not smile back. My face remained as hard as stone. I looked him directly in the eye. My voice was calm and deliberate. From now on, do not extend credit to anyone unless I am personally present. My son will be paying in cash. The manager hesitated. The smile on his face froze for a moment. He quickly understood the situation and nodded. I turned and walked away. Another piece of the financial support system had just been cut off. I would not spend another dollar funding a luxurious lifestyle built on my sweat and sacrifice. I stepped into the parking lot. Just then, the sound of a familiar engine reached my ears. A glossy black SUV rolled past me. Jessica's SUV. Through the tinted windows, I could see Jessica laughing while talking on the phone. Brandon sat in the passenger seat holding a Starbucks coffee. When Jessica noticed me leaving the store, she slowed down slightly. She lowered her window just enough to raise an eyebrow at me with a smug expression. They still believed I was desperately running around trying to gather the money before Friday's noon deadline. They had no idea their sandcastle no longer had a foundation. They had no idea the cards in their wallets were now nothing more than worthless pieces of plastic. The SUV accelerated away, leaving a faint trail behind it. I remained where I stood. My eyes followed the vehicle until it disappeared around the corner. A sense of irony rose inside me. Arrogance on the edge of collapse is always the most ridiculous thing to witness. I opened my car door. My phone vibrated again. This time it was not a message from Jessica. It was a call from Brandon. I did not answer. I let the phone ring until the sound died away. The second day was nearly over. Tomorrow would be the third day. The truth was about to be revealed. I shifted into gear, my resolve fixed firmly on the fortress that had once again become my home. Tomorrow, when the old keys in their hands stopped working, the real show would finally begin. The morning of the third day. The deadline was approaching. I sat in the living room, taking a sip of black coffee with no sugar. The bitterness spread across my tongue. Outside, the roar of an SUV engine echoed through the driveway before the brakes screeched to a stop. Hurried footsteps thundered across the front porch. Then came the sound of a key being shoved into the lock. Once. Twice. The doorknob rattled violently. My Schlage smart lock system had rejected them. Brandon immediately began pounding on the door. His shouting penetrated the thick oak panels. "Dad, open the door. What's going on? Why were the locks changed?" I stood up and calmly walked upstairs. Opening the window in the west side study, I looked down at the front yard. Brandon stood there. His face was completely drained of color. He looked utterly panicked. His credit card had been declined at the shopping center. The landlord had already called demanding payment for the luxury apartment or threatening eviction. Brandon looked up at me. His eyes were filled with confusion. "Dad, there's been a misunderstanding. Please open the door. We need that money to pay the debt. If we don't, they'll sue us." I rested my arm against the window frame. I looked at my only son. Directly, coldly. At that moment, I no longer saw a grown man capable of taking responsibility for his own life. I saw an oversized child who had never learned to stand on his own feet. A parasite crying out only because its host had stopped providing nourishment. My voice carried evenly through the morning air. "A stranger has no obligation to pay your rent." Brandon froze. He stared at me as though he were looking at someone he had never met before. He could not believe that the father who had spent years indulging him could say something so merciless. Just then, Jessica's SUV pulled into the driveway. She stepped out of the vehicle, her face burned with fury. She looked ready for a fight, but they had realized the truth too late. I was no longer their prey. If you've made it this far, then this story has probably given you some emotions along the way. Please do us a quick favor, like and subscribe. Leave a comment with the number 5 so I know you've watched this far, and tell me your prediction for the ending of the story to see whether you're right. Many people watch without doing so, but it costs you nothing and means a great deal to us. I closed the window without giving them another glance. I ignored the frantic shouting from below. Taking my suit jacket from the hanger, I slipped it on. It was time for the next phase of the plan. I was heading to downtown Seattle to meet with my legal advisor. The Financial and Legal Advisory Office occupied the 41st floor of a skyscraper in downtown Seattle. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the entire city disappearing beneath a blanket of gray fog. The noise of traffic far below was completely shut out. Up here, there was only silence and the scent of fresh paperwork. Across from me sat Jenkins, the veteran attorney who had worked with my family for the past 20 years. Spread open on the elegant ebony desk was my old will. Brandon's name appeared under the section identifying the sole heir to my entire estate, including the house, the savings accounts, and my company shares. I stared at that name. I felt nothing, not a ripple of emotion. I slid a new document across the desk toward Jenkins. "I want everything changed. I want a new will, drafted immediately." Jenkins adjusted his glasses and looked at me carefully. "Arthur, are you certain you want Brandon removed?" he asked. "He's the only son you and Martha have." I leaned back in my chair. My eyes remained fixed on the elderly attorney. When I spoke, my voice was cold and final. "Remove Brandon from the list of heirs for as long as he remains with Jessica. I will not allow a single dollar of mine to fall into the hands of someone who has insulted me." I paused. "Instead, all of my assets will be transferred into a charitable fund for underprivileged children in Martha's name." Jenkins sat silently for a long moment. Then he nodded. He turned to his computer and began drafting the new documents. The steady tapping of keys echoed throughout the spacious office. I looked out the window. Seattle's skyscrapers stood tall beneath the stormy sky. A strange sense of relief settled over me. This was not revenge. This was protection. Protection of everything Martha and I had built together through years of sacrifice and hard work. I could not allow the accomplishments of an entire lifetime to become nourishment for ungrateful parasites. The new will was eventually printed. Dark ink stood boldly against the bright white paper. I picked up my fountain pen. My hand did not tremble, not even slightly. I signed my name beneath the final line with complete certainty. That single signature officially stripped away everything Brandon and Jessica had dreamed of inheriting. They believed they could use family ties to corner me. They never realized they had signed their own sentence of financial ruin. I stood up, shook Jenkins's hand, and left the office. My watch showed exactly 11 o'clock on Friday morning. The deadline for the $300,000 had arrived. The phone in my pocket began vibrating nonstop, call after call. Each ring sounded like a desperate plea for help. I stepped into the elevator and watched my reflection in the polished metal wall. I made no effort to answer. The countdown was over. Now it was time to return home and witness the complete collapse of the two greedy people who had tried to exploit me. The harshest chapter of the story had already been prepared inside my fortress, and very soon they would learn just how expensive betrayal could become. At exactly 12 o'clock on Friday afternoon, my phone displayed 98 missed calls. The bright red number looked like a desperate scream from Brandon and Jessica. The moment one call ended, another immediately began. They were standing on the edge of financial ruin and eviction. I opened the messaging app. My hands did not shake. I did not hesitate. I typed only 2 short words and pressed send. Too late. Then I powered off the phone. I placed it on the granite countertop in the living room. The house fell into complete silence. I walked to the liquor cabinet and took out a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon that I had been saving for a special occasion. I poured a modest amount into a crystal glass. The deep red wine shimmered beneath the lights. Today was a special occasion. The day I reclaimed my independence. Holding the glass, I slowly stepped out onto the second-floor balcony. Below, near the iron gate, chaos was unfolding. Jessica was pounding furiously against the metal bars. Her face was twisted with anger and fear. Her expensive makeup had begun to smear from sweat. Brandon stood beside her, clutching his head with both hands while repeatedly staring at a phone that had become useless to him. When Jessica saw me appear on the balcony, she screamed, "You crazy old man, open the gate. Are you trying to destroy your own son? Give us the money right now." I did not answer. Leaning casually against the railing, I raised the wine glass and took a small sip. The subtle bitterness and berry notes spread across my palate. The contrast between their frantic rage and my calm silence could not have been more obvious. That silence was the cruelest punishment of all. Just then, a black pickup truck rolled to a stop nearby. 4 members of the private security team I had hired stepped out. They wore neat uniforms and carried themselves with professional seriousness. The team leader approached the gate and politely instructed Jessica and Brandon to leave my property. Jessica tried to argue. She even took a step forward as if preparing for a confrontation, but faced with the firm presence of the security team, she was forced to back down. Brandon meekly grabbed his wife's arm and began walking away. Each step seemed heavier than the last. Jessica looked up at me one final time. Hatred burned in her eyes. "You'll regret this. You'll die old and alone with nobody left to care what happens to you." I looked directly at them. My voice carried across the distance, cold and unwavering. "I don't open the door for strangers after dark." The security team secured the gate. The heavy chain rattled loudly as it locked into place. Slowly, the 2 figures disappeared into Seattle's fog-covered streets. I looked down at the wine in my hand. This battle was over. But what would become of the 2 parasites 3 months from now, and what awaited me as I tried to rebuild my life from the ruins they had left behind, that was a different story entirely. 3 months after that fateful Friday afternoon, peace had finally returned to my Seattle home. The atmosphere was no longer poisoned by greed and selfishness. Everything had changed completely for Brandon and Jessica. Their illusion of wealth collapsed the moment the financial faucet was shut off. The expensive SUV was repossessed after missed payments. The luxury apartment was taken back by the landlord. I heard that Jessica quietly left Brandon soon afterward for another wealthy man. She could not accept a life without money. Brandon was left behind with a mountain of debt. For the first time in his life, my son had to apply for a job at a warehouse on the outskirts of town. He worked 12-hour shifts every day to pay off what he owed. That was the price of weakness and laziness. I stepped into the backyard. Birds sang from the treetops. Warm morning sunlight spread across the garden. I bent down and carefully tended the rose bushes Martha had loved during her lifetime. Moist soil clung to my fingers. A strange sense of peace and connection settled over me. I had reclaimed her space. I had reclaimed my life. Thank you for joining Dad's real-life revenge. Don't forget to share your story in the comments and subscribe, so you won't miss the next valuable lesson. See you in the next video. I straightened up and looked across the blooming garden. Life is too short to keep enabling people who only know how to take from others. Remember this, family is not a place where kindness comes with a price tag. Sometimes you do not lose them. You simply stop funding them. Do not fear being alone. Fear spending your entire life as a financial servant to ungrateful children.